If you believe that your rights follow you everywhere online, then this conversation might be the one that you're looking for. Welcome. I am Pamela Murare, and this is Democracy Talks. So basically, Democracy Talks is all about breaking down complex law-related issues into real conversations that matter to you. And today, we're talking about something that's a big part of our lives, the digital tech space, right? So we use it every day, sometimes unconsciously so, as it has become a norm to us, right? The tech space is taking over, and we can't afford to take a blind eye to it, right? So it's everywhere, it's collecting our data, and it's quietly shaping what we see and hear. So the big question would be, in this digital age, can our laws and rights keep up with the digital world rapidly taking over? For instance, AI, right? So, and also, what does it mean for our democracy? You know, the way we live, the way we speak, the way we vote and protect ourselves. And to break down this, to help us unpack this conversation in a plain and a simple language, we're joined by the one and only Miss Nerushka Bowan.
Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here.
Thank you so much. So Ms. Bowen is is the founder and CEO of the Lit Institution. Um, oof. Yeah. She's the founder and CEO of the Lit Institution. She's focused in law, innovation, technology, and the future as a whole. She's an accomplished technology and a privacy lawyer, and with a deep expertise in AI, data protection, and emerging tech. She's also a podcaster and an author. How amazing, right? So, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. So, I want to start very simple. I want us to start with, just to explain to our audience in a very simple and a plain language, right? So that, people relate to this. What is a digital right and why should we know about it and how do we apply it in our lives?
Sure. So, digital rights, of course, started with the advent of the internet. And at that stage, we kind of created this new space where we were interacting with each other. And yes, we had laws that governed our relationships in everyday life. But what we found is when we tried to apply those same laws in this new digital realm, they didn't always work exactly right. And so what then started happening is we started creating laws that would apply just to our interactions in the online world. And as the internet then grew and we now have social media and AI and all of these new things, as the tech developed, we also saw further developments in our regulations and our laws coming with it. So one simple example, in the 90s, in the Film and Publications Act, we had these regulations around parental guidance and age restrictions, right, on movies and series and things like that. Now, if you looked at the regulations that were drafted in the 90s, it would go in a lot of detail about the size of the triangle that has to be at the back of the DVD in order to have that 13 or 16. Now, all of a sudden, we had these streaming companies into the market, Netflix and all the rest of them, and the law hadn't changed when they entered the market. So now, all of a sudden, they had to pick up this legislation from the 90s and try to comply with it, and then, figure out how do we now adapt this in this online environment. And then slowly over time, we got online streaming regulations and things like that. But that example applies in so many other aspects of our life. You can think about any aspect that has moved from kind of the offline into the online world. And we've seen this situation where the offline laws don't always apply so easily in the online world. And then we have to create some new kind of legal framework to assist us and in that space. So that's really where digital rights came from. We've got our Bill of Rights, our Constitution, especially in this country. It's amazing. It's one of the strongest in the world. And a lot of those rights still transfer into the digital world when we become digital citizens. But sometimes to practically implement them, we need additional rules and laws as well. So digital rights is really how do we govern our relationships in the online space.
Okay, that is, yeah. So I want to come in with technology, right? We use it every day. We use technology, but in what ways does it affect us without realizing it?
So technology, I mean, I'll be surprised if anybody can tell me. So technology, I mean, I'll be surprised if anybody can tell me they're not using technology, right? Whether you consent or not, your life is almost taken over by technology. You know, in your workplace, you have to have about 3 devices connected to you at any time. Even now, at a young age in school, they're introducing things like iPads very, very early. Parents are giving their kids phones because they want to know where they are all the time. And so technology has become so embedded into our lives that we can't function without it. Unless, you're in some hut in the middle of the forest and you've secluded yourself completely living off the grid, which is very difficult. But, besides that situation, I can't think of an example where tech is not completely embedded in our lives. And what's now happening is there's a certain level of tech that we're aware of and we have awareness of and we know about, but there's another level of the technology that's almost like the back end that we don't really have this informed consent about, but it's happening to us. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So when you walk into a shopping mall, right? As you enter that mall, there are devices that are pinging on your cell phone, whether you accept it. Obviously, all the malls have free Wi-Fi. So half the time we will go in and we'll accept the terms and just to get the free Wi-Fi, but nobody ever reads what those terms and conditions are, right? So a lot of the times you giving them consent to track you and collect your data, who you are, your IP address, all of that, because they're creating marketing data for the shops in that shopping center. Now, even if you don't consent when you walk in, they'll collect your data anonymously. So they'll still take data from you, follow you through the store, create patterns, and then they'll say to the store, the shops, there's a lot of traffic in this particular section, so the rent here in this particular section is going to be a lot higher. But you as the technology user, when you enter that mall to go and buy, I don't know, a new shoe, you had no conscious awareness that you are being tracked through that mall. And, the fact that you decided to buy some lunch after you bought your shoe was also tracked that pathway. And that applies across the board. All the social media tools we use, they're tracking every single thing we're looking at, every single thing we click on, not on the app and also off the app. I think that's another thing people don't realize. There's this thing called cookies that when you signing on somewhere, you say, yes, accept all the cookies. What they're actually doing, they're just leaving a little packet of information that's sitting there in your browser, kind of following you on the internet. So even after you leave that platform, they're still seeing where you went after that. And they're using all of that data to create profiles about you. So tech is so embedded in our lives, the ones that we are allowing into our lives consciously, and then that other layer that is coming into our lives almost unconsciously.
Mm-hmm. So with that said, what would be the rights that ordinary people, what rights do ordinary people have in this digital world, and how can we actually use them?
Yeah. So there's almost a disconnect between the rights we have and then the kind of implementation and execution of like exercising those rights, right? So if we're looking now at what the law says and what the regulations say, we actually have very strong rights. We've got now the Protection of Personal Information Act, which says, people can't collect your data, use your data, share your data without you knowing about it, without, you being informed about that. They can't just send your data to another country. There's a lot of really good laws. It even gives you the right to go to somebody and say, what data do you have about me? Show me what data you have. If you have outdated data, I need to be able to correct it. So it gives you a lot of control and power over your information as it relates to you as an individual. However, when we translate that into a practical terms, how a lot of these big tech companies get away with it is they've just got this very comprehensive privacy policy. You click once and say, I accept. And from their perspective, they've told you everything because it's all in the privacy policy. If you actually read the policy document, they're saying they're going to do all these things. the reality of it, and there's been studies that show if you actually had to sit down and read all of those policies and terms and conditions, it's going to take you years. There's just the amount that you say yes to in 1 year will take you years to read. So who has time to actually do that? So yes, they say they're informing you, but is it factual consent? And that situation hasn't really been solved anywhere in the world right now. It's like, people are still using that format to try and say that they are informing you, because we don't have a better solution yet. So yes, you've got all these beautiful privacy rights, but they don't always translate, into, in a real sense. You can, of course, if you feel somebody's wronged you, you can report them to the information regulator. The regulator can then investigate. But the regulator also only has so many resources, and they're receiving thousands of complaints. So yes, they do go after the big data breaches and things like that, but every little infringement of data protection, it's very difficult for them to also go after every single one. So they have to choose and be wise in terms of who they go after. Other areas of online protections, we have very strong protections when it comes to things like deep fakes, especially things like nudes without your consent, whether deep fake or real. If somebody distributes that content, it's a criminal offense, and we have very strong laws in multiple pieces of legislation that protects you from that. However, when we come to the implementation of those laws, we have to then make sure we have a police officer who understands the digital world and these digital laws to be able to put a case together and collect that evidence. We need to have a prosecutor who understands that world as well to be able to put a case that can go to court to actually catch that perpetrator. The other end of the thing is, when we're in the digital world, these criminals, cyber criminals, are so sophisticated. Sometimes you don't know who they are. They could be completely anonymous, hiding behind all of these crazy things, the dark net and firewalls and the rest of it, or just in some obscure country where you can't reach them. And so, yes, we have the right that, doing these things is wrong, but then when it actually happens to you, practically, sometimes there's not much that you can actually do in those scenarios.
So you mentioned that we do these things unconsciously. So you walk in a mall, there's free Wi-Fi, and then you just click, right? So then how do you stay cautious? Just simplify it to the people. Like, how do you stay cautious in, not just accepting, but like stay cautious in, practicing your legal rights in online?
So it's funny that you asked that, because what I've been noticing, especially more recently, is as tech becomes more convenient, people are almost disregarding their privacy, disregarding their rights in favor of convenience. So if this AI tool can listen to my meeting and draft a summary for me, I don't care who has access to that. Nobody's read the privacy terms. We just installing these free tools and bringing them into all of our meetings, whether they're confidential or not, just for the convenience of getting a printed out meeting summary at the end, right? And many people are choosing the convenience of that over the potential privacy implications of, what if that company gets breached? Do they have sufficient data security to store that? What if that company goes out of business? All of my meeting notes gone. There's so many questions that we're not asking because we're choosing convenience. Or not even convenience. Sometimes it could just be something fun and cute. There's a lot of these tools, whenever a trend comes out, like upload a picture of this in an AI and see, how you look as a character or as a superhero, whatever it is. We're very willing to just give all our data to these free tools in exchange for a bit of fun, in exchange for a bit of convenience, and nobody's actually paying attention to what are we giving up when we are sharing this information. You must understand, in the world today, there's no such thing as a free lunch. If the tool you're using is completely free, you're getting huge benefits, but you're not paying any money, you are still paying. Doesn't mean money is not the only way we pay. And in today's world, data is more valuable than money. So they'd rather have your data than your $20 a month. So if you're using that free tool, all that information you're giving it, and they tell you in the terms and conditions, we're going to train our models with this data. We're going to create new algorithms with this data. We're going to create new products with your data. So you are the ones kind of voluntarily doing it. So as you say, how do you protect yourself? How can then the law protect you when you are the one choosing to do that? You know what I'm saying? Because the tech companies will argue, nobody's holding a gun to your head and saying, give me your data. Nobody's forcing you to do it. We are, as individuals, choosing to do it. And because so many of us are choosing to do it, these tech companies are gathering so much of data. It's making them so powerful. And the laws never anticipated this happening. Like when social media started, it was just like one new thing. Like nobody thought how big and powerful these companies are going to end up. Now, if you look at, like the top 10 most valuable companies in the world, it used to be like oil and gas companies, those big infrastructure type companies would dominate the top 10. Now, if you look at the top 10, it's tech companies, and mostly tech companies who are holding the most data that are sitting in there, not the ones holding the most gold or oil or gas. So the tables turned so quickly before regulation could even catch up. So, how does one protect yourself? You have to make yourself understand what the risks are of putting yourself out there, and then ensure when you navigating the digital world, you taking steps to mitigate those potential risks. If you are fine with your picture being out there and it being used in an AI, that's fine. I'm not saying you mustn't do it. You must just understand what the risks are. However, when it comes to your baby, for example, maybe apply a bit more caution. Maybe not post minors who can't consent freely on the internet, because now we've seen, unfortunately, with a lot of scandals that have broken all over the world, what sometimes happens with those images. And it's so easy these days to manipulate those images. It's very, very scary. So maybe keep those type of things offline in the scary world that we live in. But if you as an adult wants to make that choice to share that with the world, you're doing so, but do it knowing what you're getting yourself into. Don't do it ignorantly.
I know you've shared an example, right? But can you also share a story where knowing someone's digital right actually helped them to practicalize it, and maybe sharing that might help someone else who's in a similar situation?
So you're saying knowing your...
I'm saying, can you share a story where knowing your digital right actually helps someone else, so that it can be relatable in terms of maybe someone is in the similar situation,
See, the problem with digital rights is that if you teach somebody before the event happens, it's much, much, much better than trying to help somebody after the fact. So we're seeing, especially in schools at the kind of teenage level, people are being influenced to share intimate images with each other. And then all of a sudden there's these WhatsApp groups. And then all of a sudden that one picture you thought only one person was seeing, your whole school is seeing, or maybe multiple schools are now seeing. Now you want to try and get help and enforce your digital rights because this event has happened, which is very, very difficult. There's a lot that can be done. Those WhatsApp groups can be closed. You can take out protection of harassment orders against the perpetrators. You can get interdicts. You can get a lot of legal stuff done in that scenario, but the worst has already happened, if you know what I mean. Like that picture's already been shared. A lot of people have seen it. Whereas if you educated somebody up front, these are the risks of what can happen. And yes, you might trust this person in the moment, but look at all these other examples of kids who also thought they trusted this person. That person didn't end up being who they said they were. And this is the situation that unfolded after that. If we shift the focus on early education, teaching people, how to navigate this world in the right way, it's almost more powerful than just knowing what your rights are after the event happened. Because even with strong rights, after the event happened, there's only so much that can be done. Whereas if you can take the precautions to prevent putting yourself in that situation, I feel like that's a lot more powerful.
Okay. So what are the simple things that people can do every day? Oh, sorry. Okay. So laws are like a safety net, right? But when tech moves fast, the net needs to be fixed and strengthened regularly. For instance, the digital world, such as the use of AI, is evolving incredibly fast. How can laws catch up with that? That is the main question for today. You know, there's AI is evolving fast, but like, how can the laws keep up with that?
Question. I mean, like, have you ever heard law and regulation being described as fast or agile or innovative? We always see the law as like slow, red tape, you know, like something that we have to like deal with, almost like a grudge in these fields. Whereas tech is always like, you know, fast moving. Like if you look at AI, like almost every day there's like some breakthrough. There's like a new model here, there's a new feature here, there's a new this here. How on earth are we meant to keep up? It's literally impossible because regulation starts with like a white paper, then a policy paper, then a green paper, then somebody does a first draft, then it gets debated, then somebody does a second draft, then it gets debated. I mean, POPIA took 9 drafts, got signed in 2013, only became a law in 2021. And, you know, it took close to 20 years for it to go from let's make a law about protecting privacy to actually getting that legislation. Now, if let's just say we're going to do the same thing with AI, who knows what is the society going to be like in 20 years? Maybe controlled by robots. Like that law's not going to mean anything 20 years from now. So they are trying to move quicker with AI. So we have a policy document that will be published very soon, the National AI Policy Document. We have very smart people in government basically looking at what's going on in the rest of the world, not just in the EU. Previously, EU was seen as like this gold standard. Whatever's happening in Europe, let's all just like copy paste that. We're not doing that anymore because remember, we are also a human rights-based democracy. We do things a little bit differently. And when we bringing AI into this economy and into this environment, we have to do it in a way that still protects the individuals and the human rights of individuals. Now, if you see what's happening in like the first world countries when it comes to AI deployment, it's almost like let's deploy AI in this organization and get rid of half our staff because AI can do the work of half our staff. That's not something that can work in an environment like South Africa, given the socio-economic climate. So the type of policy we have to implement here would look very different than what a first world country may be looking at from a capitalistic perspective. So when we see AI policy and AI regulation developing, we want to see that coming from the perspective of how do we protect the human rights of our citizens from this powerful technology on one end, and then also we need to see risk-based frameworks. So we can't have the old school frameworks of, you know, the triangle must be this side on the back of the DVD, because then the DVD is dead tomorrow, and then that regulation becomes obsolete. So if you have tech-based policy and regulation, it becomes obsolete before it's even passed. But if we have risk-based regulation, then we are looking at what are the potential risks coming out of the use of these particular tools, and how do we prevent those risks from becoming widespread. And so if you as a developer of this platform have potentially one of these risks, you have to put in guardrails and safeguards to make sure those risks are not widely accessible in public. So we saw that Elon Musk has X and he's got the AI called Grok. And when he first launched Grok, it was supposed to be this like freedom of expression AI. I'm not going to put guardrails on it. It can say and do whatever it wants, as compared to the other ones, which were a bit more conservative. It would sometimes refuse to answer your question if you were trying to push it a bit too far. And what ended up happening with Grok is that it was creating nude images of people. It was being a little bit racist. It was like going all off on tangents. And then they actually had to put some guardrails in place because it was, that kind of risk profile was getting a bird too far. It had to be reined in. So there has to be some kind of balance. It can't be too strict. It can't be tech focused, and it has to be risk based. That's how we create some kind of environment that has longevity. Otherwise, if we say we're gonna create a law that just does large language models, AI, that's the tech of today. We don't know what the tech of tomorrow is going to be.
Okay, so basically, you must know your rights and also be able to know your responsibility as well, and be conscious about what you do online. You can't just do things for your convenience, but you have to be cautious about it, and take control over your digital space. So to close it off, I know you've answered most of my questions, but just to close it off, what are the 3 practical, everyday tips you'd share with our listeners to just help them navigate this change while protecting themselves online?
So the first one is educate yourself. I think the world that we live in today, change is inevitable. And if you feel like what you studied at university is all you need, you're going to become outdated very quickly. So stay up to date, stay educated, stay informed, because the world is ever changing. And if you keep that curious mindset, you will evolve with the times. The next one is empower yourself. Empower yourself with the skills required for whatever industry you're in, whatever you choose to do. Make sure you empower yourself, because you could be that person who creates the next innovation. But if you're sitting in the backseat and saying, "Oh, I've never used AI before, I can't do this, it's too scary," whatever it might be, you may be missing out on this wave, this exciting wave of opportunity. It's like at the beginning of the internet, right? We didn't know, it was just like chat rooms and like Yahoo search and email. That was the internet. People couldn't even comprehend like YouTube. People couldn't comprehend banking on the internet. People couldn't comprehend social media. That's where AI is. So if you empower yourself, you could create that potentially next big thing in your space with the new tech that's coming up. And the last one, I think, we need to remember empathy. At the end of the day, if we look at what can tech replace and what can tech not replace, there's certain human attributes that will never be replaced. And if we remember our empathy for humans, our human-to-human connections, ChatGPT can't take your client for coffee just yet. And so if we remember that relationship building, that being with people, connections, it's never going to go out of fashion. And so if we focus on education, empowering ourselves, having that empathy for your fellow human, I think it would be very difficult for an AI to replace you.
It was a very powerful conversation. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. You have to educate yourself, empower yourself, and have empathy when you're in the digital space, rather. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was a very impactful conversation, and yes, thank you so much.